When Rosecrans' beaten army staggered into Chattanooga after Chickamauga, they carried with them the weight of defeat. What had once been the proud and confident Army of the Cumberland was now a force battered in body and spirit. But the city's location, though strategically vital, was a trap. Confederate General Braxton Bragg wasted no time tightening his grip. He pushed his men into the mountain ridges and high ground that surrounded Chattanooga like a fortress wall. Lookout Mountain rose to the southwest, a towering sentinel that commanded views of the Tennessee River and the approaches to the city. To the east, Missionary Ridge stretched for miles, its slopes providing natural defensive barriers. Confederate pickets controlled the gaps and passes, hemming the Union army inside. Within weeks, the Union soldiers realized they were prisoners in all but name. The Union supply line, already stretched thin after Chickamauga, became nearly impossible to maintain. Confederate cavalry harassed wagon trains, destroyed bridges, and cut off roads. Supplies had to be dragged over long, treacherous mountain passes from Bridgeport, Alabama, more than 60 miles away. As autumn turned to winter, food became scarce. Soldiers went hungry, their daily rations shrinking to almost nothing. Hardtack, salt pork, and coffee, staples of the soldiers' diet, disappeared from campfires. Horses starved, some dropped dead in the streets. Desperate men boiled leather straps, ate roots, and searched the countryside for anything edible. A soldier from the Army of the Cumberland later recalled, "Our lot seemed hard beyond endurance. We lived for days on parched corn, sometimes gathered from the fields at risk of life. Hunger gnawed at us by day and by night. It seemed as if we must give up or perish." Morale plummeted. Desertions increased. Even the bravest veterans questioned whether they could hold out much longer. General William Rosecrans, still haunted by the catastrophe at Chickamauga, seemed incapable of decisive action. He sent frantic requests to Washington for help, describing his army's plight in increasingly desperate tones. But when it came to leadership inside Chattanooga, he faltered. Officers noticed his hesitancy. Some whispered that their commander was broken by defeat. President Lincoln, always cautious about removing generals, agonized over what to do. But finally, in mid-October, he acted. Rosecrans was relieved of command. The man chosen to replace him was one whose reputation had been forged in the fiery campaigns of the West, Ulysses S. Grant. When Grant arrived in Chattanooga in late October 1863, the situation was grim. Rain fell constantly, turning the roads into mud. The army's supply wagons were empty. Soldiers shivered in their tents, weak from hunger and sickness. But where Rosecrans had seen only despair, Grant saw possibility. His calm presence steadied the officers. His confidence, though quiet, inspired the men. He quickly made clear that surrender was not an option. The first order of business. Supplies. Without food, there could be no battle. Without wagons, no campaign. Grant needed a new line of supply, one the Confederates couldn't choke off. That's when an innovative plan landed on his desk. Brigadier General William F. Baldy Smith, a talented engineer, had studied the terrain around Chattanooga carefully. He proposed what seemed like a daring gamble: to open a shorter, more secure supply route along the Tennessee River. The plan was simple in concept, but risky in execution. Smith suggested seizing Brown's Ferry, a strategic crossing point downstream from Chattanooga, and linking it with Union troops marching east from Bridgeport under General Joseph Hooker. Once connected, this cracker line, named after the hardtack crackers soldiers longed for, would funnel supplies directly into the starving city. Grant approved the plan almost immediately. There was no time to lose. On the foggy night of October 27, 1863, Union soldiers quietly climbed into boats and drifted down the Tennessee River. The current carried them silently past Confederate pickets, who suspected nothing. At dawn, they landed at Brown's Ferry. In a swift, determined assault, the Union troops drove off the small Confederate guard and secured the position. Reinforcements soon poured in, building pontoon bridges to strengthen the foothold. Meanwhile, Hooker's men advanced from Bridgeport, pushing through the rugged mountain passes. By October 28, his column linked up with the troops at Brown's Ferry. The cracker line was open. The effect on the Union Army was immediate and dramatic. Wagon trains rumbled into Chattanooga, carrying flour, bacon, hardtack, coffee, and medical supplies. Hungry soldiers lined the roads to cheer them. Campfires once again crackled with food cooking in pots. Horses were fed, artillery resupplied, and morale restored. One officer later wrote, "It was as if the hand of Providence had suddenly lifted us from despair." The army was reborn in spirit. With food in their bellies, the men were ready to fight again. The Confederates, who had counted on starvation to break the Union Army, were stunned. Bragg's carefully woven siege had unraveled in a matter of days. Inside his headquarters on Missionary Ridge, Braxton Bragg fumed. His subordinates were divided and restless. Longstreet openly criticized him, and many of Bragg's officers no longer respected his leadership. Instead of striking back decisively, Bragg sent Longstreet's corps north toward Knoxville, weakening his own army, just as the Union prepared to strike. This decision baffled historians then and now. Why would Bragg, already outnumbered, divide his forces further? Some argue he feared Union advances elsewhere. Others suggest he wanted Longstreet, a critic, out of his camp. Whatever the reason, the result was clear. The Confederate grip around Chattanooga loosened. Inside his headquarters on Missionary Ridge, Braxton Bragg fumed. His subordinates were divided and restless. Longstreet openly criticized him, and many of Bragg's officers no longer respected his leadership. Instead of striking back decisively, Bragg sent Longstreet's corps north toward Knoxville, weakening his own army just as the Union prepared to strike. This decision baffled historians then and now. Why would Bragg, already outnumbered, divide his forces further? Some argue he feared Union advances elsewhere. Others suggest he wanted Longstreet, a critic, out of his camp. Whatever the reason, the result was clear. The Confederate grip around Chattanooga loosened. Grant now turned his attention to the enemy. The Confederates occupied strong defensive positions on Lookout Mountain and Missionary Ridge. A frontal assault up those steep slopes would be costly, perhaps suicidal. Grant sought a way to stretch Bragg's line, to threaten multiple points at once, and to force the Confederates into overextending their weakened army. He began to plan a series of coordinated moves. The Army of the Cumberland would demonstrate against the center. Hooker's men would threaten Lookout Mountain. Sherman's troops would strike the northern end of Missionary Ridge. Together, these actions would test Bragg's defenses and, Grant hoped, break them. The stage was set for one of the most dramatic turnarounds of the entire Civil War. By mid-November, the Union soldiers in Chattanooga had transformed. Weeks earlier they had been starving, desperate, and on the verge of collapse. Now fed and reinforced, they stood taller, their confidence returning. They drilled, prepared weapons, and repaired equipment. Songs once again echoed through the camps at night. The men sensed something big was coming. After the misery of the siege, they were eager to strike back. Chattanooga itself bore the scars of siege. Its streets were filled with mud and debris. Buildings had been converted into hospitals, where the wounded from Chickamauga still suffered. Civilians, caught between two great armies, lived in fear and uncertainty. But all knew that the battle for Chattanooga would not be delayed much longer. The Union Army was ready. The Confederate Army, despite its strong positions, was weakened and divided, and at the center of it all, the city of Chattanooga waited. A gateway to the south, and the prize that both armies desperately sought to control. The clash was inevitable.